So, welcome to Let the Record Reflect. My name is Donnell White, your Executive Director. On behalf of our President, Reverend Dr. Wendell Anthony, we're glad to be here with another important conversation on Let the Record Reflect. I'm joined today with two very important people, two good friends of mine, State Representative Rudy Hobbs and School Board Member, President of our Detroit School Board, Mr. LaMar Lemmons. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
There's a couple hallmark issues for the NAACP since our existence in 1909. Two of them are under attack right here in the city of Detroit. One is voter empowerment with the imposition of an emergency manager, and we've seen it on our school board as well. And the second is the state of education in this country. We believe at the NAACP that public education is the new civil rights frontier.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
School Board Member Lemmons, what do you say to that?
I say that's absolutely right, and that's what's under attack. The quality of education, the dismantling of public education, and the dismantling of voting rights. You have the right to vote, but then when you have an emergency manager, your vote doesn't count.
Very, very right. And State Rep, I'm going to ask you to chime in on some of the public policy pieces here first.
Okay.
But School Board Member Lemmons, if you could paint the picture with what's going on in DPS currently. I know there's some history on how we got to this point with the state takeover going back to Engler.
Right.
But if you could kind of fast forward through some of that, and where are we today?
Certainly. The state took over the district with a reform experiment in 1999. At that time, we had a $1.5 billion bond, almost $100 million.
Billion with a B.
With a B, billion dollar bond, and a $100 million surplus, and a $40 million rainy day fund. Fast forward 7 years, without going into the details in that failed experiment, test scores plummeted under their leadership. So we were at about the middle of the state at that time. There were as many districts below us as there were above us. When they returned it, we were near at the bottom after 7 years. And then on top of that, we had a $250 billion deficit, or $250 million deficit. So they turned a $350 million turnaround. And so when the new board came in, who were all new, 11 new members all at once, highly educated but inexperienced, and within 3 years they couldn't fix, not that board, nor all the king's horses, and all the king's men could put that district back together again. And so the state used the deficit that they had created as a rationale to take it over again with Robert Bobb, and we bring in an emergency financial manager. He took the $220 million at this point. The board was able to knock off about $30 million of the deficit, and that's it in 3 years. And he took that deficit and increased it by $100 million.
Wow.
And within 2.5 years, and we took them to court, but it took 2 years to get final adjudication, and it was found that he caused irreparable harm, and he had a judgment against him. But since he's indemnified, there was no consequences to his actions. So enter Snyder, and he brings in Roy Roberts, who is now systematically continued to dismantle, who came in and said he was going to put the kids in the EAA. Now, what's interesting about that? To put the kids in the EAA in the beginning of the year before they had failed is saying that I'm going to fail them, because the only kids that went into the EAA are the ones that he failed as superintendent, acting as emergency manager, which gave him the power of both the superintendent and the board. Under Public Act 4, he was both the superintendent and the board, so he can do one thing, which is what Bob did: no bid contracts.
Yes, sir.
So normally we have to go elected officials.
Follow the money.
Exactly. Elected officials, we have a bidding process, and it has to be fair and open, or you end up in the conditions such as our former Mayor Kilpatrick. It has to be. But under emergency manager, you don't have anybody to be accountable to. You can give no bid contracts. Dictatorship, and at the same time not educate a child, and at the same time not be accountable to a single parent or a single taxpayer.
State Representative Hobbs, Brother Lemmons talked about something with the EAA. This is the second time that I can draw our listeners' ears to. We had our voice heard on an elected school board. Detroiters overwhelmingly said we want to empower our school board members. Yet and still we have an emergency manager in place. 2.3 million people in the state of Michigan said we do not want an emergency manager law, yet and still we're seeing emergency managers erected in communities of color all across the state. From a public policy standpoint, how do we get here? What is the genesis of this EAA? What is the genesis of this new public act that circumvented the will of the people?
How we get here is that, we have communities in distress, man. And to be very honest with you, you said it already. It's the money. It's very attractive to have a city, a school district who has billions of dollars in contracts and bonds. And those things have to be serviced. You go out for the bonds, and there's a lot of money to be made. I could share one quick story with you about Detroit Public Schools. The treasurer. When Detroit Public Schools said, hey, look, we want to go service our bond, cost you about about a $200 million bond. Okay. All right. Typically, a school board will go out, put an RFP out, to service the bond. But our treasurer shared with the emergency manager, I already know who's going to service our bonds. Goldman Sachs is going to do that. And this is where the danger comes in. It's these no bid contracts, not accountable to anyone. And I think the worst part about this
Those
entire
are the same culprits who were wrapped up in the financial meltdown.
They're almost bankrupt the world economy. The world economy.
But I think the most striking thing about this is that look, it's our job to make good public policy.
Right.
And one of the things I ask all my colleagues who support this legislation, show me one place that this has worked. Show me one place where EM went in, took care of business, and left that place in a better position. They can't.
Can't do it.
Can't do it. But yet we take the most important city in the state of Michigan, and we all know that look, if Detroit does not succeed, the state does not succeed. It's just that simple. We take the most important city and we take a failed policy and we implement it. And Detroit is too important to fail. And that's what I've shared with everybody. Everybody who supports this piece of legislation, Detroit is just too important. It deserves a different approach. It's not Three Oaks Township. This is the city of Detroit.
That's right.
This drives our entire economic development, our base here in the state of Michigan. Too important to fail.
Well, I know we need to take a break. We're talking about education today with my guest, State Representative Rudy Hobbs, President of Detroit School Board, Mr. LaMar Lemmons. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Let the Record Reflect.
You're watching Let the Record Reflect with the Detroit branch NAACP. Celebrating 100 years of civil rights and social justice advocacy.
Welcome back to Let the Record Reflect. I'm Donnell White, your Executive Director here at the Detroit NAACP, standing in on behalf of our President, the Reverend Dr. Wendell Anthony. We're talking today about education. I'm glad to have with me in our studios here State Representative Rudy Hobbs and President of the Detroit School Board, LaMar Lemmons. Thank you once again for being with us, gentlemen. So we're talking about some of the complexities of the issue with education here in the city of Detroit and across the state of Michigan, quite frankly, in urban centers all across this state. But there are a number of people who are watching who are frustrated. They're tired of hearing about bonding issues. They're tired of hearing about who's in control. Is it emergency manager or is it the people we elected? If I'm working at home, it's hard for me to keep up with that. You know what I mean? It's hard for me to keep my hand on little Johnny, make sure he's staying out of trouble, getting his homework done while I'm working 50, 60 hours a week just to pay utilities and pay insurance to live in the city of Detroit. What can we do as Detroiters? What can be implemented in Detroit public schools that continues to allow that district to thrive, that sustains public education, that puts parents' minds at ease, that their children are receiving a quality education?
I would say the number one thing you have to do is parents have to get involved by going directly to the schools and getting involved in the schools, working with the principal and the teachers and the community. We need assistance early in the morning, watching the children, going to the schools.
Parental involvement.
Parental involvement. We need involvement with the parents, assisting with tutorial programs, and just being involvement with extracurricular activities. That's still key, whether irrespective of who's in control of the district.
Sure. Representative, we empower our elected officials to go to Lansing to have our best interests at heart. What's being done on the Hill to protect our students here?
Well, I want to kind of just double back to something that you said at the very onset of the segment. And you talked about this education being the civil rights issue of our time, right? And look, what made our civil rights movement successful was engagement, was protest. And look, there were single parents, single mothers, single fathers who faced the same obstacles that our parents face today. But they made it a priority to be engaged, and we have to take that same commitment
That's right.
that our grandmothers had, that our grandfathers had, in the '60s when they fought for something important. We have to have that same commitment today.
That's right.
That same attitude, that same determination, the same commitment. I mean, we can't make excuses. Education is too important.
That's right.
For parents, for anyone involved in this community to make excuses about why they're not engaged. Because I'm telling you, a parent get engaged at a school will turn a school around. It'll take a failing school and make it a successful school.
So education, our young babies, last comments?
It's the future. It's what's going to drive this state. It's going to be, we either going to succeed as a state and invest in education and make sure that our kids have jobs when they graduate and raise their families here and get great jobs and attract jobs here, but it all revolves around education.
That's right.
And right now we're failing. We are falling behind all our neighboring states, and we're definitely falling behind the leaders. And we just have to simply just do a better job.
Mr. President?
You should note that the EAA has already been found insolvent, and if they had not got a $10 million grant from the Eli Broad Foundation, they would have already went belly up, and also an advance of over $9 million that they owe to Detroit Public Schools. Our principal competitor now, the only competitor outside the charters within our border.
Right.
And had they not got that advance, and the money for the formation of such came from at the expense of Detroit taxpayers.
That's right.
And so I would ask that the parents pull all their children, refuse to send their children to the EAA schools, and demand that transportation be provided for them to a DPS school.
Well, let me thank both of you again for taking the time out to be with us today. This issue is by no way over, so we know we'll continue to have these conversations until our young people receive the best education that they can. Detroit, we know education is one of the NAACP hallmark issues. We've enacted what we call our 5 game changers. Number 1 is economic sustainability. 2 is what our conversation was centered around today, and that's education of our young people. 3 is health. 4 is public safety in the criminal justice system. And lastly, number 5, which is what we talked about today as well, voter empowerment. So you're going to hear a lot more about those issues. Stay tuned, Detroit. It's been another episode of Let the Record Reflect. And we believe, as MLK said, we are not what we ought to be unless our children everywhere are what they want to be. God bless you. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks, brother.